Hi, I'm Denise Chaffin. I am your podcast host for Talking TA, and we are at Transform 2025. And I have with me right now Eric Hunn, and he is the Chief People Officer, SVP, for Premier Protein. And Eric and I are going to be discussing a few questions. First of all, Eric, what's your big takeaway? What do you want to learn from this conference?
I think the big takeaway is that everyone is clamoring to know, does some company have this whole generative AI thing figured out and we don't? And I think the takeaway is that I don't think anyone does. And there are maybe a few people that are a bit more advanced than others. But for most of us, we're somewhere we're starting to dabble. We're seeing a little bit of marginal productivity gains here and there. And certainly using it, but that right now it is not changing our productivity, our ability to need as many people as we do to do our work. Like everything that we have been doing in the past, we've been augmented slightly. And yet we also see that on the horizon, things are going to change, but they haven't changed yet. And I think you get often at these events a sense of satisfaction that I'm okay, you're okay, right? That like you didn't figure out a way to save $8 billion because you no longer need to have an entire department because you've got this amazing chatbot that has done that. I have yet to hear those kinds of use cases for anybody,
Sure.
and particularly a company like ours, which is largely a knowledge worker. We have teams of marketing people and a few customer service people and some operations people and IT and HR and all those functions. Those functions have yet to be severely disrupted, right? So we're not in a space where the technology is a little more advanced. Whereas if we had a large team of translators, you might say, gosh, the technology is really good when it comes to language translation. Perhaps we don't need that many people. We're not in that position. I haven't met anybody yet who's really found that huge unlock because of AI.
All right, you're talking about generative AI. One of the other topics that's big right now is agentic AI. There's systems out there. You talked about the chat bots, right?
Yeah.
And I guess they're going to be called chat agents
Mm.
for a lot of the different companies that are going to utilize them.
Mhm.
And there's so much controversy right now as to what to use them for and how it's going to be effective. And you talked about saving companies a lot of money with respect to employing these chatbots and developing them in order to let go of some of the staff that are doing these roles now. So what do you think that we need for human resources and talent acquisition to be able to integrate some of these tools, if you would, into what we're doing to be effective and to basically improve our workforce?
Yeah, I think there's this interesting paradox in this space where we need to sort of hold two things simultaneously true in our heads, which are fundamentally agentic AI. AI is going to transform our society in ways that we probably can't really fathom and that are going to be hugely disruptive. And over the course of humankind, we've had these major disruptions, right? You look back in the 1940s, the majority of Americans were farmers, and now that's a very small fraction, right? So there's going to be this disruption. I think that is a pretty clear thing if you watch this space closely enough. And at the same time, when it comes to something like agentic I don't feel like we need to be moving in some sort of cat-like readiness position where I've got to be the first ones to get there because the first person to get the cheese is going to be the winner in this, right?
Right.
These products are going to be integrated into the large platforms. There are going to be winners in this space, just like there's Gmail, and maybe there's a few people who kept their old Hotmail account or whatever. But at some point, everybody figures out that there's a platform to use for these things. And of course, there are companies that are starting to market these things and starting to turn on with a bit of agency. But all of our platforms have these firewalls and safeguards and context. And if I think about the sort of ecosystem of all the technology stack I use, I can't even navigate my tech stack myself because of the passwords and the firewalls and what my work restricts from my personal and so on and so forth. And so I don't think there's some big system out there that we need to be watching for because we've got to get it the minute it's on the market, right? So when you think about, you mentioned talent acquisition, we subscribe to the same big TA platforms as every other company does, right? They are going to have these massive teams of developers trying to figure out how do I integrate this within their stack. And it is going to be, I think, maybe not a winner take all, but I think a lot of these little companies that are trying to sort of say, oh, we can be the first mover, we can get in here and try to do it, that's going to consolidate over time. And eventually, the major HRIS platforms, the major TA platforms are going to say, oh, yes, we have an agentic system that will handle these things. And so if you're going to use that for, say, candidate experience or for scheduling or something, you don't need to find that company out there that's got the scheduling agentic AI to solve this because it's so important that we don't have schedulers at this moment, right? That's going to all become apparent over time.
Well, I like that perspective. And it's true. I mean, especially with some of the bigger companies, even now there's some conversations around some of the larger companies acquiring some of the smaller companies that might have some special tool that they can see where they can integrate that into their own systems. So moving on, let's talk about improving the candidate experience. In what ways can we refine our hiring processes to create a more positive and meaningful candidate experience, not just for people we hire, but for all candidates that we are in contact with?
One simple thing that we did a couple of years ago is that in every job description we have, there's a standard blurb that explains our process, which tells you how it's going to work, how the fact that we have panels, that we have bias blockers on all of our interviews and what that means for them, the amount of transparency they're going to get throughout the process, how many interviewers they should expect, how long it might take them to get through our process. And so kind of letting people know in advance of this is what the system is, these are some of the unusual things about us, that helps candidate experience. And then the second piece of that is we have been very deliberate about following the research that's a good decade old now, which says it is not meaningful how many interviewers you have once you get to approximately 3 interviewers. The marginal benefit, this is some work that Laszlo Bock at Google had done back in his book, Work Rules, which is you get 1% marginal benefit for each additional interviewer after that 3. So we make sure that we follow that insight and we only have as many people as we need on the interview panel. So that means that you're not going to go through and say, well, great, I'm passing you on to the next level and the next level and the next level. Sometimes it's an endless process. Our process can be a lot faster and leaner because of that. People are going to take different roles. So we're going to have these archetypes that we give to everybody so that you're not going to sit there and say, oh, I got that same question about my resume again. Wait, did I tell you that or did I tell the other person that? People are going to take a different flavor so that ultimately when we get to the roundtable process where we have these kind of bias blocker systems in there, people are going to have different takes. And so somebody's perspective can be combined with somebody else's and say, well, I asked these questions and you asked these questions to try to get the fullest picture. So we can be faster, we can make the process feel more intentional rather than we all just opened up your resume, right, 2 minutes before the interview, scanned quickly to see where you went to school and what your last job and your title was, and asked the same series of questions over and over again. We're trying to curate that experience to make it as fast, as, sort of interesting and transparent for the candidate, and all that just makes their process that much easier. And then we're very explicit in our job descriptions, which is kind of our secret sauce, which is we tell you exactly what we're looking for, and we even tell you what we're not looking for. And so we will have these blurbs in there about, hey, if you are super process oriented and you like to have a handbook and a rule book that explains everything, how it's laid out, this isn't the place because we're a lot more flexible and lean and just innovative than that. And we haven't figured everything out. There's no one way to do everything. And if you like that kind of place, you might want to choose a larger, more bureaucratized company. But if you like to build those things and maybe chart your own course and have some nimbleness, that's for you, then come and think about us. And so that way we realized that it wasn't a volume game where we wanted 1 million people applying for our jobs because our TA team is only so large. We wanted that funnel to be narrowed sooner so that by the time you actually have applied for the job, you may have self-selected and hopefully said to yourself somewhere along the way, hey, this premier protein team, these are interesting people. They have told us kind of what their flavor is. I can see the culture starting to come through in their words. And so they're going to apply. And we already have sort of selected in a little bit of like, okay, you might think our quirky kind of way of doing things is for you. Let's have a conversation.
Awesome. What about people that you don't hire or people that you don't interview? How are you handling those candidates?
Yeah, I mean, particularly when it comes to not hiring people, if it's just through the system, right? There's only so many people that you can respond to, and so in that case, you just try to do it in a way that's as sort of positive and affirming as possible, but also realizing that any company you're going to get a number of people that don't even meet anywhere near the qualifications, right?
Sure.
Not even halfway.
Close.
And so in that situation, you sort of wonders if somebody's just clicking a box, right, and just trying the so-called shotgun approach. But if we've actually engaged with a person, particularly if we've interviewed them and sort of opened up a two-way conversation, we ask the hiring manager to ask them to write a personal note to the individual and just give them a little bit of context about how their process went for them and how much they enjoyed talking to them and those sorts of things in order to give them some, detail of like, there's a human there, they saw me, they thoughtfully considered me, and even if they didn't select me, that there was a process there that I can appreciate or respect that they chose somebody else,
Right.
but that we still had a great conversation, right? And that didn't change.
And that's great too that you're having the hiring manager do those notes versus the
Yeah.
recruiter. I like that. That's a different twist. That's very good. Let's talk about return to office. And uh, uh, th- in your perspective, how has the shift between remote work and RTO impacted productivity, collaboration, and culture?
Yeah, it's a subject that's really near and dear to me because we were over 3 years ago, we implemented our return to office strategy. So back as soon as vaccines were available, which was roughly the summer, even the late spring of 2021, we invited people back into the office and said it's optional. We invited in the leaders first, right? And so we decided that we need to have leaders role model by coming into the office and say, hey, if you've got a title of director and above, we expect you to come in. We did it in a modest way. So we just did 2 days a week, right? We didn't over index and say 3, 4, 5. We just said, hey, a couple of days to have collaboration and the kinds of things that we found were better in person,
Sure.
challenging conversations where you have to innovate or play with ideas. It's just much more facile to do that in person than online, particularly when people are being tugged in so many ways, right? We've all had those meetings where you've got maybe 25 little postage stamps on that call, but fundamentally, there's some research that shows only about 3 or 4 people are actually engaged at any moment in that conversation, and the rest are sort of on the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
And so you might feel like, oh yeah, we're all there, we're all on the call, we're all participating, but fundamentally, there's a very small people are doing that. Whereas if we're in a room looking at each other and having a conversation, it would be pretty obvious to me if you're sitting there tapping on your computer and right got your laptop open that you're not participating in the conversation.
Right.
I like to call those people meeting tourists, right?
Oh, I love that.
So anyway,
And tourists.
when it comes to back in the office, we got people in before kind of their assumptions about the working from home forever got too grounded in theirs. We never told people that there was a indefinite thing. We told people very clearly when the conditions are safe enough, when the cases are going down and vaccines are available, we're going to ask you to come back in. We didn't tell them it's going to be some arbitrary date on the calendar only to move it 5, 6, 7 times like some tech companies did where they started to lose trust with people. Is we said these are the conditions we need and we'll give you enough notice and then we'll invite you to come back in. And then once we did that, we've never had to make it mandatory. It is the most powerful thing that motivates human behavior is what other people are doing, right?
Right.
And so when you see our company on Tuesdays and the entire Bay Area workforce, which is where we're located principally, coming into the office and you're the one on screen, you realize somewhere along the way, oh, I'm supposed to be in the office. And you just come because that's what people do. And so we just align on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays, have an entirely different experience those 2 days than we do on Monday, Thursday, and Friday. And that alignment together means that those are the days where we need to do the collaborations, the bigger meetings where you're going to lose people, where you have to sit around knee to knee and play with an idea, where you want to teach somebody and really have them engage versus just sort of listening with one ear. And so we plan all those meetings on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And then the rest of the week is for a one-on-one, which frankly, it doesn't really matter where you are. I'll do my one-on-ones principally while I'm walking. And so I'll do a walking meeting with that person. And all I can do is hear them in my ears through my earbuds, right? And I'm saying, okay, all I can hear is your voice and I'm walking down the street. and I'm completely present, even though I'm not physically present, because it's just the two of us. If I listen to a meeting with 25 people, I'm just going to be completely disengaged from that conversation, not able to participate. And so we just sculptured our work week in a different way so that we're really activating people differently on those days in the office versus when they're away, where they can do deep work and kind of focus on some of that more deep individual contributor kind of work.
I like that. Now, what about one conversation that has come up a few times has been people who are new to career or people who are new to your company and need to shadow somebody or be
Yeah.
trained. So how are you incorporating mentor programs then for people who are newer to your company?
Yeah, so we did a couple of things. So about a year and a half ago, we created a formal mentoring program and put a platform out there that people could select each other and do some skills matching, and gives you some flexibility and some ability to track these things. So we created that, and we really, for the most part, hope that those conversations had at least one in-person element. Although once you've got that relationship established, then you can have that sort of coaching session remotely once you've got a little bit of affinity together. And then we were deliberate about creating a values and culture academy. So we created that about 3 years ago. And so we run those on a quarterly basis where people get together physically. We have a offsite location, a beautiful kind of lush park space where we invite people to come from all across the country. Field sales people meet headquarters people. We mix them up. And we run that to give people kind of a jump start on what the culture is. So as we've scaled up, because we're growing at about a 15% clip every year in terms of employees, the values, the culture that sometimes is really easy to pick up when you're in an office is harder when you're not. And so you could see all these little signals that we're sending each other are so much easier to do when you're in person. And so that, kind of brings people up to speed faster about what it is to be successful in this company, what our core culture looks like. And so we realized that that mentoring piece, along with having those couple in office days, was super important. And so to your
Sure.
early question, I think people who've maybe spent more time in an office like I have kind of took for granted of, well, I feel productive because I'm at home and I know how to do my work. But what if you're new to the
Mhm.
company? I imagine that when I was in my 20s and first time in the work, I was imprinting, right? I was a sponge watching my boss
Mhm.
operate in the work world and saying, how does he navigate interpersonal conflict? How does he talk to his boss? How does he have
Sure.
engagement with me? And I got all of that rich texture of him and watching him navigate. My first boss was a male. And then over the way, my first CHRO is a female. And so it was like, oh, okay, now here's a different leadership style. Now I'm spending time with the CHRO. What does the CHRO look like when they're navigating the workspace, right? And so I think we forget sometimes that from our standpoint, it might be clear to us that like, hey, I'm fine. I don't have to do my commute. I'm faster doing some tasks by myself. But we're forgetting that so much of our job is to show other people how to do their job, to model leadership, to signal these
To
behaviors.
shadow us. Yeah.
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 And I think one of the insights that we actually put in our job description, which I wrote, was nobody really has any great Zoom stories from the workplace. So if you think about it, right? I mean, there's a few of those fails that we've all seen those videos where the stories about like what not to do in terms of your background or the door opens and somebody walks in the background.
Yeah.
But when I think about the stories that tell you how to be successful and how to operate in our work environment, like those stories tend to be from the workplace where we were physically in person. You said, there was this time where this person walked over to me, right? So here's an example that I heard last week, which is I knew this company was special because the CEO walked over to my desk as a brand new employee, introduced herself and said, hi, I'm the CEO. Nice to meet you. And that person said, I have gone to a different world where on my first week, somebody is actually introducing themselves to me, right? And that's a powerful story for that person, right? That tells
Yes.
you like, okay, human connection is real. Power dynamics are not important here, and that like we need to be able to see everybody in the workplace, right? And that's a story that probably wouldn't have read quite as interestingly on Zoom, where you're like, hi, new employee. I'm the CEO. I'm in postage stamp number 72 on your screen.
Postage stamp. I love that. There are no good Zoom stories. That's true though.
Yeah.
And the fact
There are
too,
bad Zoom stories.
bad Zoom story. Yeah, there are. But I like the fact too that the word that you use, imprinting, that's an important word
Mhm.
because I think that when we are newer to career, I even think about my own career when I started, the people I learned from. I could not have learned from them nearly as well on a Zoom or a video conferencing platform
Yeah,
as I did in office.
absolutely.
Now, what about then when you have this, because the return to office is such a big conversation. When you have then this more agile hybrid work model, if you would, how do you then help those people then to have that imprint, that experience with other people if everyone's kind of coming in and out like on Tuesdays and Wednesdays? And so who are they going to shadow? Who's going to be their mentor? You mentioned that once they kind of develop that relationship,
Mhm.
then they can actually kind of have more of those some days in office, some days not. Do you think that's going to be successful then for those people?
Well, the beautiful thing is that we had the intuition very early in this process to say everybody needs to be there at the same time, otherwise it doesn't make any sense,
Right.
right? And so I've heard about all these companies that say this team decides when they come through, and this team is selective, and this team doesn't. Well, I don't just work with my one team, right? I just don't want to learn from my one team. Like, if anything, that's a perfect way to breed a silo, right? To say this team is here on this day and the other team isn't. And so we resisted that and said everybody, which 80% of our workforce is there on a given Tuesday or Wednesday. And so that alignment is super strong.
Mm.
So you get to decide whom you want to mentor with informally or sponsorship, which is a slightly different thing than mentorship. All of those relationships happen because you're connected in person, you're seeing people, we're in the same physical
Sure.
building at the same time, and that you can sort of organically say, that's an interesting person. I noticed that they spoke at this company and I'd like to learn more about their background. And we do this interesting thing, which is every Tuesday to kind of kick off the week, we have an all company meeting. It's lightly curated. There's kind of a loose agenda that just recurs every week. People can put in whatever slides they want. We don't really actually police them. And people just get up there and share. It's a cultural thing. There's a new person on my team, or this special thing happened to this person, or hey, I want to express some gratitude to this team who helped me out, or this person who helped me out. And so you get to hear about all the texture in people's lives, their personal life, their work life. And so it just gives you that transparency to say, hey, I'm really interested in that head of quality who came up there and talked about how much they appreciated somebody who a cross-functional partner helped them. I
Sure.
want to get to know them. I want to ask them a question about that, and it just gives people that sort of self-selecting. And so between that and the sort of more formal mentorship program where there
Right.
is some algorithmic connection there, you can do either a self-selection or you can go through the formal process. And by the time I think those things come together, you just have enough sort of like texture to say, okay, this is who I want to maybe start a conversation with or get to know a little better. And then we design a ton of like work events, like at least once a month, there's some kind of big blowout event where people are kind of getting a bit looser, just having a fun interaction, whether it's around some sort of holiday that's on the calendar, that might be a cultural basis. You get to know people in those contexts from other teams and get to sort of bridge those cross-functional relationships and help sort of foster those relationships that sort of sometimes they'll call those like loose connections, right? That sort of
Right.
like is where you really get the value in the relationship.
Oh, definitely. No, and I think it sounds great because the people who are newer to our industries or our companies need that kind of experience more so, like you said, than people who've been with the company for a long time who can be more agile with their in-office days or working from home days because they already have experienced all this, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing that has come up time and time again is the success. How successful are newer people going to be? So the way you have it described, the way you're describing in that way that you have kind of mapped out for your company sounds awesome because then that does give them a success path forward.
Mm.
And also still some of that flexibility because one of the things that keeps coming up for people all the time is I want a hybrid role. I don't want to be on site full time. I mean, COVID changed all that permanently, I think, from the way it sounds. So,
Yeah.
sounds like you guys have a great plan.
Yeah, and I always think that I remember hearing about the promise of hybrid, right? That it could
Mhm.
be the best of both worlds,
Right.
where you have that sort of flexibility, but also that connection. And I think a lot of people have found it to be sort of the worst of both worlds, particularly if it's the arbitrariness of I don't know who's going to be in the office, so
Mhm.
I'm spending this time to come to this environment, so I'm losing the productivity of the commute, but then there's nobody there, or I'm spending all my time talking to a giant head on a giant screen who isn't in the room, and it just doesn't make any sense for me to be doing this, right? And that's kind of the worst of both worlds if you don't design it and engineer it in a way that like there is a critical mass of people so that you can have those quick conversations and build those connections through that alignment process. And so we've found that our scores when it comes to engagement and how we rank on the Great Place to Work surveys has just gone up. So from full-time pre-pandemic high, dips a little bit during the pandemic because we were all remote, not forever, it was a year and a half there. And then as we've ramped up and gotten more into the office, our scores just have gone up and up because people are sort of enjoying that flexibility. I can do those doctor's appointments, I can do the caregiving, I can pick up drop off as I need to, as long as I don't have some burning meeting that I have to physically be on screen for. 3 days a week, I have that flexibility. But then 2 days a week, that alignment is super important. And so you just really foster those days. And even though you might have this feeling, if you're in a position like me as head of people of, oh gosh, is everybody working right now? What are they doing? I can't see them. You have to tell yourself, like, that's a bias that is coming from your position, your need, right, for control things. It's not real. It's a story you're telling yourself. And that flexibility is probably the magic that's working for them in order to be productive, to feel trusted, right, and to really be successful at work. And so even if you want those urges, you resist them and say that flexibility to get the work done, as long as it's outcome-based, if they're doing that on a Monday and a Thursday and a Friday, great. And I would love to see them Tuesday and Wednesday, because when I walk over to their desk, I will want to largely expect them to be there so that I don't have to type out yet another email to say, hey, let me articulate this thing I wanted to talk to you about, which isn't that high a priority, but I probably should catch you. You'll know that that person is going to be there. So you can often have that sort of mental to-do list of, oh, there's 3 or 4 people I need to check in the person when I'm there. And I'll do that rather than spend 20 minutes typing out an email to explain the whole situation to them, only for them to respond. And at some point, that's why work is miserable, right? Because you're just sitting there sending emails to each other and kind of slowly articulating all of the context that could have been solved if you had those touch points where you could predictably find that person.
Sure. Sounds like a really great roadmap and a really great process that you have. In fact, you guys should, well, we're going to share it on as we, share the podcast. And
Yeah. And the challenge is, it's interesting that people are still talking about this subject, because I always reflect on this model. It dates back to the 1940s of freeze, unfreeze, and refreeze, right? And it's about change. And so what happened is we were frozen in this 5-day-a-week model. So when I started my career, 5 days a week in person, no flexibility, got it. That's all we do. That's what knowledge workers do, right? You put on a suit and you come into your government office, in my case, Monday through Friday. And then all of a sudden on March 13th, 5 years ago, right, everybody said, actually, you can work from home. We're going to use a new platform and all your meetings go online. Everything unfroze overnight. Oh my goodness. Hey, it's kind of working surprisingly better than we thought. So our expectations sort of soared, our productivity soared. And then we started to get that disillusionment of, what am I missing? Why am I feeling so busy even though I lost my commute? And before people got too into that, we asked people to come back into the office, right? This is 2021, before they started to say, oh, good, I can move across the country and work from anywhere in any time zone and live in any geography. And at some point, your office starts to fall apart because there's nobody there, right? Everybody's everywhere. And so you want to get that before people
like some organization,
and kind of gotten too entrenched in those things. You had to bring people back in. And now that we're at 2 days a week, people ask me, are you going to go to 3, 4, 5 ever, 0? And I say, well, unless there's some intervening event that unfreezes everything that we understand about work, no, we're going to stick to these 2 days, because this is how we've refrozen and this is just what we do.
And it's working.
Yes. And we didn't ask for too much. There's part of me that wishes I had that 3rd day that we're in the office, because my Tuesdays and Wednesdays are crazy. They're a different, wonderful kind of crazy, but they're crazy because I got to get a lot of things accomplished in person, talk to a lot of people. But at the same time, that's me, right? That's just me thinking, well, I'd love to have this. But the people who don't have a lot of meetings are probably wondering, why do I need to come in the office 3 days a week? I just come and do my same work in the office, and I only have 1 or 2 meetings. So you just have to always put yourself in the shoes, right, of kind of everybody in the office and say what's true for them is not necessarily true for me.
Sure. Well, especially like you said too, you come from a background of 5 days a week, a lot of us do, and trying to readjust our thinking around it is probably the most challenging part.
Hmm.
And because once you have something settled and once you have a plan in place, then it's easier to execute on it and make those adjustments around it and try to just, yeah, like you said, mentally change your own thought patterns, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other nice thing that you'll notice at this far along, so even if people have sort of delayed on their return to office, as the workforce changes, as attrition happens, you'll notice that people vote with their feet, as it were. And so there's some people who want to work completely remotely from anywhere, and that they trade off some of those connections in person for that. And there's companies out there, right? It's not as many as we might think, but there is a portion of that workforce. There's some roles, like we're in a massive hotel. This is a 5-day-a-week operation, right? Most of the folks here are physically here, and
Right.
that's their 5 day. And we're somewhere in the middle. And if that appeals to you, where the way I literally feel on Monday nights as I'm thinking about going into the office is, oh, good. I am excited to see some people in office because I had a great flexible Monday, but I miss humans. I miss talking to people in person. I'm tired of looking at Zoom meetings like I did on Monday, and I can't wait to be with them, right? And then on Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock, when I'm thinking the hybrid part is changing now to the remote, I'm thinking, oh, how wonderful it's going to be tomorrow that I can catch up on these things that I have been brewing in my head, that some insight or something that came up the Tuesday, and I've got a lot of flexibility. And then Friday afternoons at 1 o'clock, we all magically stop working. We take Fridays afternoons off, which we did during the pandemic, and the emails just stop magically. And I go on a hike and I start thinking about work, and some people start doing their shopping list, whatever it is that they want to do that day. But we've aligned that week, right, so that it's sustainable, right? Because it's always sad to me. I'm in one of these roles that you would call an executive, right? And you read these stats about how many executives are burnt out, right? And how many people are struggling. And I have a busy life. I've got young kids and a family. And yet at the same time, I've got another decade or so of doing this kind of work that I want to be able to sustain. And if I work 50, 60 hours a week and try to balance all those things in my life and the richness of that and family life, I'm going to get burnt out. And so really trying to maintain that work week, that I really do compress my work week into 36, maybe 40 hours a week.
That's awesome.
Actually sitting in front of either a computer or at a desk. And the rest of it is in my head, but nobody needs to know where I am when I'm doing that kind of work. 'Cause
Exactly.
sometimes that's when I'm listening to a podcast like yours in the morning before I wake up. And sometimes it's when I'm hiking and I'm coming up with the insights for the talk that I'm going to do here at Transform. And it's like, well, that's a form of work too, right? Because I'm clarifying my thinking. It's just, I'm also getting some steps in and helping my heart.
Well, I think it's great. I love the way you guys have organized that.
Thank you.
A lot of people can learn from it and map it and follow it. Use that as a guideline for their own companies. Because I think there's a lot of companies that are still up in the air with how they're going to work in a hybrid situation.
Yeah.
So I like the example you've given.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people may listen and go, oh, that's a great idea. We should try that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Eric. I so appreciate this.
Yeah, it's
I really
delightful.
do. Yeah, thank you.